David Littleproud, leader of the Nationals. Let's get the perspective about what this means for the regions in a moment. Corey Bernardi, Linda Scott, and a whole lot more before we finish up tonight in about 40 minutes' time. David, I was just having a look at the overall plan for expenditure in the areas of agriculture, forestry and fishing. We go from $5.1 billion this year in 4 years' time to $2 billion. Tells a story about their plan for the regions, doesn't it?
Well, mate, look, and before we go any further, we should do something that the Treasurer wasn't prepared to do, didn't have the courage to do, was to thank Regional Australia for the surplus that has been delivered tonight between agriculture and resources. It was Regional Australia that delivered that. He didn't have the courage to say it, but we should. So Regional Australia should get its fair share, and unfortunately this budget hasn't done that. And what they've also done, before you even get to the expenditure, the revenue is very interesting in this budget. They're introducing a fresh food tax. They are actually asking Australian farmers to pay a tax to pay for the biosecurity of international importers to send products to this country. They are asking farmers to pay for that. That is absurd to think that Australian farmers have to pay for their competitors to send the product to this country to cover the biosecurity costs by the Department of Agriculture. And then when you couple that also with the truckie tax, a 6% compounding tax on the road user charge, that means that every Australian is going to pay a bigger bill at the grocery store because of this government. This is a fresh food tax that has been imposed for the first time by this government tonight. Then you look at the expenditure side of it. This is the insanity of it. Not only have they cruelly and maliciously ripped away in our last budget $23 billion worth of infrastructure, they have just doubled down again tonight on further infrastructure, taking away our future. $852 million worth of infrastructure in dams alone. That's our future. That's our children's future about growing more food and fibre to reduce your cost of living. Then ripping more money, $120 million review of infrastructure across regional Australia. That means it'll cost us more to get product off from a paddock or a pit to your plate or onto a port. Means you're going to pay more. They've taken that away from us. Then you have to look at the fact that if you're living in regional Australia today, we have just as big a cost of living crisis as you do in a capital city, but not $1 spent on increasing the number of childcare places. So there are families out in regional Australia tonight that want to be able to go and fight this cost of living crisis by going back to work, and there are jobs in regional Australia, but they can't because they can't find a childcare place. They spent $4.7 billion on childcare affordability, but not 1 cent on childcare accessibility for people in the regions. We had a program that was going to partner with providers to build new places. And, you know, when you see all these groups like the Parenthood that are running around lauding this budget, they've forgotten about regional Australian mothers and young families out there and try and get back to work. And the sad thing also is on health. They're also imposing a tax on cigarettes, and that's a tax on our poorest. And the National Party represents 7 of the 10 poorest electorates in the country. And there's not any real major spending in regional health. We become the forgotten Australians in this, but unfortunately what's going to happen is every Australian is going to foot this bill, whether it be the new fresh food tax, right through the fact that they're not investing in our future, which means it's going to cost us more to get our product to your plate.
So just two specific parts of what you've just said, and that's an incredible overview that I think is going to be quite startling for people. But again, surprise, surprise, regions generally don't vote Labor, so they get punished, as we've talked before. In the last budget, it was the removal of a whole bunch of infrastructure. In this budget, it's all of those things that you just mentioned. Let's just firstly get to the truckies tax. Now, they're doing that because they're going to be increasing the types of taxes that exist in and around, as you say, road usage, but also diesel as well. That is, I mean, again, there's nothing that doesn't move in around in Australia that isn't on a truck. So, again, this is going to be a cost on top of everything. This will, of course, lead to inflation, interest rates, all the rest of it, but they're rigging the Reserve Bank to come up with a bunch of new people that'll meet less frequently and do what the government wants. But speak specifically to people who are watching us. What does the truckie bit mean?
Yeah, so this is a road user charge. They're taking it from 27 odd cents up to 32.5 cents, and they're going to compound that 6% every year. Now, the insanity of this is that it's meant to go to maintaining and improving our roads. And unfortunately, when you overlay that against the infrastructure budget, when they're stripping away billions of dollars out of roads right across this country is that they're banking that. They're not reinvesting that back into the productivity measures that'll help to grow the pie, not just in regional Australia, but grow efficiencies across the country in getting our product to a port or onto your plate. So this is just a cash grab for regional Australia to pay for what will be things like the metro rail link around Melbourne. They've invested $2.2 billion without a business case. Infrastructure Australia without even running the ruler over it. Even the Victorian Auditor General saying this is insanity. That will end up in a project of $250 billion or at the expense of regional Australia. But you've got to understand, while people in the city might wipe the brow and go, oh, that's great, we're still going to get our infrastructure in the city, ultimately you're still going to pay for it, because if we can't get our goods to you quickly and efficiently, you're going to pay in the lack of efficiency that's there, and we're going to pay the bills. So we're going to pay a tax that our trucking companies are now going to pass on to everybody, and you'll pay for that at the checkout.
Well, and also, you've got this scenario where, as you spoke about before, say a couple watching us in Dubbo tonight, and they're trying to work out, look, we both want to go back to work, we both want to earn more money, we both want to have a better life, but usually mum's staying at home because, as you say, you can't find a childcare place, let alone the cost of it. So she's not able to go and find a job. 140,000 people, according to this budget, will lose their job in the next 12 months. Yet what are they doing? They're tipping another 700,000 people into the country via immigration in the next 2 years. The assumption being that they're semi-qualified people who will live in the cities, again, a screw over of the bush.
Yeah, and there's no actual policy and nuance about how we actually bring those skilled migrants to regional Australia, but also the planned mechanism of how we do it in a responsible way, particularly around the infrastructure we need, not just in roads and telecommunications, but housing. The housing issues in regional Australia are just as acute as what they are in metro. And this government is focused solely on metro. But if you're going to bring in all these migrants, and some of them we definitely need, particularly in regional areas with the skills that we're missing out on. And I went to the Job Summit to be constructive and say, let's have a bespoke model for regional Australia. But to forget about the planning of how you do that and just to simply bring them in is reckless. And will have significant impacts on every Australian in driving up housing prices, driving up rents, not just in metropolitan Australia, but also in the regions. This just takes some common sense, and that's what the Nationals have tried to be constructive from the start. Use some common sense in here in Canberra to make sure there are practical solutions, not ideologically driven, that don't meet the reality test of how and who's going to pay for all this.
Yeah, I'm with you. Thank you very much, David. We'll talk again. There's plenty of issues here in regional Australia. We will keep talking about them. We will focus on them. Those taxes, they are really going to hurt people, not just in the bush, but everywhere else. Thanks for the time.